China has identified a new type of
Hey, hello everybody. How you doing? Stopping by to do another quarantine review. Doing something a little different today. As you all have maybe noticed, if you've been keeping track of our Facebook page and YouTube page, you know, we haven't really been doing much. I've been doing a few solo reviews during this little quarantine lockdown period. And my partner, Daryl, who you guys know very well, is on sabbatical. He's not into too much doing things remotely. So I've brought in a guest today to help us move along on our conversation. I think it's going to be really interesting. So I want to introduce a good friend of mine from an acting class that I take in the city. This is Clark Ellis. He's an actor. He's a history buff. And the reason I brought him in today is because we're going to be talking about the Vietnam War, specifically the documentary that Ken Burns made back in 2017. Just called The Vietnam War. It's a fascinating 10-part documentary series that aired in the fall of 2017 on PBS. And you can watch it now, if you'd like, on Netflix. It's all there. It's about an almost 18-hour commitment of time. It's each episode is over an hour. Actually, each episode is almost feature length. But it's very engrossing. It's very informative, and you don't even really feel the time. You're just sucked into the story. So definitely recommend it for anybody that's a history buff. If you haven't seen it, I didn't watch it when it first aired, and so I just recently watched it on Netflix over an entire weekend. And I wanted to bring in Clark to talk to me about this a little bit because I know that he's a huge history buff. So let's just get started. Thanks for coming in, Clark. I appreciate you joining us via Zoom to talk about Ken Burns' Vietnam.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
I'm a big fan of Ken Burns.
Yeah, he's great. He's like the pedigree of a documentarian.
He's been doing stuff since the early 90s. And so I think that he's got it down to a science. And this is no different than everything else he's done. It's just phenomenal, exceptionally researched. We have so much footage that were shown throughout this documentary series as well. That's, from reporters that are on the ground, in the bush with all the troops covering the whole thing from beginning to end. We have so much footage. It apparently took 10 years to research and get everything organized for this documentary. It took them 10 years to make this, and it shows.
It does take a lot of time. I think the first one I watched was the Civil War in 1990.
Yeah, that was a 90s one. Yeah, I got to see that next. I have not seen that. I'm looking forward to watching that. I can't wait to watch that. I have a quick thing to mention here, just because I think it's interesting. The crew, the documentary research crew that went, obviously helped to get this made, they accessed more than 24,000 photographs, and they examined 1,500 hours of archival footage to get this produced. And all of that covers basically 25 of the key battles throughout the Vietnam War. And what was interesting, too, is that this documentary doesn't just talk to big political figures. Like, there's no conversations with people like Kissinger and, politicians and things like that. This really just focuses on interviewing those that saw it firsthand. We have combat veterans from not only America, but also from Northern Vietnam and Southern Vietnam. We have some of their military people from the North Viet Cong and South Vietnam people. And then we also have protesters that were protesting the war back in the States, and just a bunch of different people, I think over 70 in all, that saw the war firsthand overseas. They were in it, and they came back to tell their story. So it's a very, very interesting, in-depth, first-person look at the Vietnam War. I guess we'll start, Clark, with a little bit of the history that the first episode really goes into of, it pretty much starts on, how Vietnam, over there was a French occupant, they occupied Vietnam for many, many years. And it kind of first starts with that, right?
1853, 1854, France first came in, and they were a colonial power and ruled like a colonial power for a long time. And of course, there's all those things that go along with colonial rule. A bit of some abuses went on and so forth for the natural resources. But you jump ahead a little bit to Ho Chi Minh, and he was born in 1911, I think.
Yeah, something. I think you're pretty much right. I actually have it here, but I think that's pretty much spot on. Yeah.
I think he's older than that. He's got to be. I think because he was at the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 in France.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we were wrong. He was born May 19th, 1890.
That's it. That makes sense.
And he died in September of 1969.
And
key figure.
He was an educated person.
Yeah.
He changed his name many times. He was idealistic, I guess. And he wanted independence for Vietnam. Before the United States got there, he was, Japan occupied in 1940, and they were fighting them. And the United States, through OSS agents, were supporting him and funneling supplies to him to attack the Japanese. And of course, once World War II was over, France wanted to come back in and get their colonies back. So they came back and he fought France. And it ended with the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954, which is very, dramatic, bad battle. And then suddenly, the United States starts creeping in to kind of fill their spot for idealistic reasons, I think, more than anything. Just, the advancement of communism.
Yeah.
And of course, Vietnam became split, just like Korea. Because in Korea, the Russians took some surrendered the Japanese in the north, the British and the Americans in the south, and formed the split. And in Vietnam, it was China in the north and Great Britain in the south. And that formed the split, putting, these two different governments. It's sort of interesting how that happened, all because of Japanese occupation. But more than that, he was, he became enamored with the communist philosophy and stuff when he was over in France at the end of World War I and so forth, and brought some of that ideology back. But it was more about the independence of Vietnam and the Vietnamese people, more than just, yes, they had a civil war, because South Vietnam was, had a, I want to say a monarchy, not a monarchy, but they were corrupt, and it wasn't, not everybody supported the South. It wasn't all just about, commies or non-commies. But they did, it was essentially a civil war. But the bigger picture was Vietnamese independence of any foreigner, whether it's French, Japanese, or American. That's my take.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's pretty much how it went. And it was interesting that, you see throughout the series, the events that took place, how, the United States, once we got involved, we were just, for lack of a better way to describe it, we were just installing one puppet after another in South Vietnam to lead the country as this war, this bloodshed just keeps continuing year after year after year. And it gets to the point, that most of these rulers, their rule wasn't respected a lot by the people. There was massive protests, especially there was one, I forget which his name, I have it here in my notes, but I don't want to waste time trying to find it. But,
the Buddhists. The Buddhists were.
I was going to say the Buddhists were very much against him, because he was, if I'm not mistaken, he was a Catholic, and he was doing a lot of cramping down on a lot of the, the rights of the Buddhist people. And so that's when the monks were protesting, and that's where we got that famous photograph of the that one monk setting himself on fire in the middle of the street, which became one of the most famous photographs in history. And so, not only are the people of Vietnam, both North and South, dealing with their country being torn apart from within, we're dealing with, you're dealing with unrest in the streets, separate from the fighting that's happening in the bush and in the mountains. and regular civilians are just caught in this thing, and it was, and it's still, even after the war ended, they still weren't free of that kind of stuff because the economy pretty much almost collapsed after that. There was high inflation. The communist rule ended up, becoming the norm anyway. So it's like the whole thing was for naught. And it's a tragedy of human proportions. The amount of people that died, it's astounding. It's really astounding what happened over there.
I think so. I found it interesting that the first American casualty was in 1955. An advisor.
An advisor, correct? Yeah.
He was, I forgot his name, but he was basically ran into an ambush.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't traveling with a military convoy or anything. I don't believe, but he was the first casualty. But there were OSS agents there in 1945 meeting with Ho, and at the end, when the Japanese pulled out, to see how this thing would go. But the Viet Cong, they held the countryside. North Vietnamese were coming down through the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Yep.
And it wasn't one trail. I used to think, it's like one road, but it was like arteries. It snaked through Laos and Cambodia down the back way, and some of it went down the border of Vietnam as well.
It was amazing, the way that the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, or also known as the Liberation Front, how they had that artery that was going down, and they were doing a lot of this stuff just when there was a battle and part of the road or part of their path would be destroyed, because that was one of our main objectives, was to try to block these routes so they can't get their supplies. They would just have all these people. They had a constant flow of just civilian volunteers, a lot of women that would come and help to fight the cause. And they'd be there with the shovels, digging the dirt out, making room for the trucks to come down. Things are being carried by hand. They're each given a very, very small amount of rice to live on every day. And they're almost starving to death while they're digging out these trails so they can continue to, have the flow of supplies going down to the battlefront. And it was amazing. These people were just, their ingenuity and their ability to control their land. They were like ants, and there was no way we were going to beat them. It's the same thing that the Russians went through in Afghanistan. These people were dug in the mountains. They couldn't beat them. And we faced that same thing here. And it was really impressive. The tunnels and all the different mines that are all over the place, and the traps. I saw a thing. I guess it was in the second to last episode, or maybe the last episode, where they're talking about how there's still countless, tens of thousands of mines that are still in the ground all over South Vietnam that have not been exploded. And every year there's an X amount of casualties that even up to this day, or they get maimed or injured badly when they just happen to stumble on one of these little mines in the field somewhere, because there was no way they had the manpower and even the funds to go there and get rid of all these. They said it would take a couple hundred years to find and eliminate all of these mines that are still all over the place. So it's
that still happens in Europe from World War even, and World War II. They have people that have been working sort of full time. That's their job, to go out and disarm bomb.
Yeah, Middle East too. There's a lot of these things. In the Middle East, they're finding these stuff in the sand and different weapons that we've left there that are still armed to some capacity.
As recent as 1990, and even and World War II was in North Africa even.
Yeah,
it's amazing what modern warfare in the 20th century has done. So much. But Vietnam had so many bombs dropped on it. It's hard to imagine.
It's nuts.
I think it was on the Ho Chi Minh Trail alone, and I guess all of Vietnam. It was as much. It was dropped on the total tonnage on Germany and Japan.
Mm-hmm.
All of World War II. It's just, I cannot hardly fathom that, because it's just Vietnam. You think of it as it was a bucolic tropical backwater more than I realized.
Yeah.
And the soldiers in the film, they, in the beginning, they even talked about, they're having a war here. It seems so, beautiful, like Disneyland in a way.
Yeah, there was even some soldiers that mentioned that when they get over there, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is a beautiful country," forgetting that they're in a war zone, but it's gorgeous, tropical paradise in a way, And then we
And
destroyed it with all the bombs, and then that awful napalm. God, horrible.
napalm, Agent Orange.
Agent Orange, and we know what happened with that. If people that don't know, Agent Orange was a chemical weapon that we were using over there to destroy crops and stuff like that. And our soldiers were coming back from with exposure to that, and years later, tons and tons of them were coming up with different types of cancer. And even people on the Vietnamese side, obviously, were same thing, getting exposed to the Agent Orange. And there's people over there that are, that were struggling and dying from exposure to Agent Orange. It's terrible. Chemical weapons are terrible.
And they were using that to defoliate
Yeah.
the jungle.
Mm-hmm.
The whole swaths, for the jungle to quit growing or whatever, because it was triple canopy and so dense.
Yeah.
And some of those soldiers in the Ken Burns film, testified that what did it take them? I can't remember. 8 hours to go
100 feet.
yards.
100 yards, whatever it was. You're right. They spend the whole day just cutting through this brush, and they've really made no progress.
And then they would get in an ambush.
Mm-hmm.
They want to pull out an airstrike, and they can't see them.
Yeah.
And you didn't want to drop bombs on your own troops, which does happen.
And that happened, unfortunately, a couple times. There was a couple incidents that were highlighted in the documentary that we unfortunately killed some of our own men.
Oh yeah. It was. I had an uncle over there. He was a farm boy from Illinois, drafted off the tractor at age 18. He went in 69. Yeah, 69. He was only there 6 months, but he got wounded. It was on April of 1970. He was in the Tropic Lightning Division,
Mm-hmm.
which was the 25th Infantry. And they were involved all in southern Vietnam and over towards the Cambodian border in the Black Virgin Mountain, which was this big mountain complex that I just looked it up to read about it. And it was interesting that Japan occupied it when they were there. But now, this particular Sunday morning, said we're going to go out and we got I think that the American Airborne Unit was on top, and the Viet Cong were in the middle of the mountain, dug in. And they would go in, they had tunnels that had been dug years ago. And they had ways of getting in that and going out the back and escaping through Cambodia. So they were going to come from the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
and then try to help the airborne that's on top. Because, we would drop soldiers from one mountain to the next, via helicopter. And while the VC had the mountain in the middle. So they walk up there and, they rode up on APCs. They dismount. He's at the base of the mountain. And he's jumping in a bomb crater and popping up and firing his M16, dropping back down, pop up, fly.
Mm-hmm.
His barrel was cherry red. He's firing so much, and they didn't see anybody. So once they said, "Okay, cease fire," and they couldn't hear nothing. It was just because they were started firing back at him, the Viet Cong.
Mm-hmm.
So then he keeps firing. And one time he popped up, and he thought he saw a face to the left, and then it was just bells. He took an AK-47 bullet, came in at an angle, and hit him right in his helmet.
Oh, thank God.
The bullet spun around, and it disintegrated the helmet.
Oh, my God.
And parts of the helmet went into his head. So he went down. He thought the whole top of his head was blown off. And because he was bleeding, and you can't see.
Yeah.
And some guy grabbed him, and said, "Come on, Jim." They ran back down the hill.
So, any serious damage, or just like a stitches kind of situation?
Well, it was stitches, and it took a little chunk of his skull, and took him back to an APC at the base of the mountain. They put a big patch on him, and next thing he knows, he's on a helicopter, and the helicopter banks out of there. It's sideways, and the door is completely open.
Yeah.
He thinks, "Oh my God, I'm going to fall out," but he was strapped in.
Yeah.
And
Scary.
there was a door defender there, all strapped in. He was just banging away, and took him to a base hospital, and that was pretty much it.
And what, was he sent home after that? After recovering?
Well, no, they wanted him to go back into the bush. He had a sergeant. He was in a hospital in Okinawa, I think. Sergeant would come around. "Hey, Jim, we need you out in the field."
Oh, man.
"I don't feel too good today." He'd keep watching I Dream of Jeannie reruns and stuff. And,
Mhm.
and eventually his dad died.
Oh,
And so he got a hardship to go back and run the dairy farm.
okay.
So he always maintained if that didn't happen, he would have never made it back from Vietnam.
Yeah.
His infantry, they went into Cambodia and they got ambushed big time. And they, and I looked it up and it's pretty much verified. That's what happened. I used to think, well, maybe he's just embellishing the story a little bit. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't. So that was his 6 months. That was in 1970.
Okay.
And he got out. And but oh yeah, he mentioned there would be women on the side, trying to sell Cokes or something. The GIs going by and those APCs on the roads.
Yeah.
You stop and do that, and they're all nice and whatever, and it's hot, it's thirsty, and you got a Coke, from home, and somebody would sneak around and throw a grenade in the gas tank that had a rubber band around the handle.
Yeah.
So the gas would eat through that rubber band eventually, when you're down the road, and then boom.
Wow.
That happened several times.
Sneaky.
He saw a guy blow up an ox cart once. I was like, you can't do that. The ox carts?
Yeah, yeah.
Just like, it's like a wagon pulled by ox. Farmers.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're just right on top of the APCs, and he fired his grenade launcher, poof, blew it up. Just like that.
It's I was thinking while you were talking about the helicopter rescue, that I remember there was a moment in the documentary where they were talking about how this was really the first war where we instituted the helicopter the way we did, and it became obviously the most important part of our response, our ability to get in and get out, because the helicopters can pretty much evacuate a bunch of guys in a matter of minutes as opposed to hours, so they can get in there and get in and out. And obviously a lot of them were getting shot down, but we really saved ourselves a lot of men with those helicopters. And it's really an amazing invention. I always marvel at helicopters. It's probably the best in terms of rescue, because now you'll use it on mountain rescues and things like that. And they do, I love, the Coast Guard has those water rescues. It's really just an amazing piece of machinery. And
yeah, they used it tactically to bring troops to the.
They got those big machine guns on the side,
Oh yeah,
cool.
I mean they
Wow.
would get down.
Yeah.
And use them to evacuate the wounded. That was the two big things, and that was the backbone of our strategy.
Oh, really? Absolutely. And then there was the when you were talking before about the hills, and that was one of the things that to me was making me scratch my head, is that these soldiers that survived are telling these stories about how a lot of their missions involved, tomorrow at whatever 100 hours, we're going to go and we're going to attack that hill over there because it's an important strategic point for the Viet Cong, and we're going to go take it. And then they would span a couple days fighting to get to take over that hill. And then once they're on the hill, all right, we're done here. We're going to go somewhere else. They go somewhere else. 3 months later, they got to go back and then take the same hill again. And a lot of the soldiers are like, what is the point of this? We're not doing anything. We're going there. We're killing ourselves. We're killing these guys just to come back and do it all over again in a couple months. It seems, which one of them was that famous battle, Hamburger Hill, which obviously made into a movie and things like that. And
that's
it's just like sending the guys to the slaughter. It's very sad. The strategic measure for success was another point that they referenced in the documentary that I didn't really know about. That their gauge, the Americans' military's gauge for we're winning this war, allegedly, is how much of the what's the body count of our enemies, of the northern the Viet Cong and the northern Vietnamese, and that was their measure for success, was the body count. Other than that, there really wasn't any kind of measure for success because we weren't really getting anywhere. These guys were just amazing warriors, and they had a great, they had a really good military leader on their side. North Vietnam, they had that guy. He was the General Giap, G-I-A-P.
General Giap.
I read, this was interesting. he's referred to and revered as one of the greatest military minds in history. And he died at over 100 years old, and he was the most
Just recently.
long-lived guy over there in terms of the military or public office. He lived the longest, and what an amazing strategic brain he had.
Oh yeah. I mean, they were that several times in the beginning. God, what was his name? The American officer right in the beginning. And they were interviewing him, and he said, "Well, I thought that the North Vietnamese is one of the finest soldiers I ever saw."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that.
For that, and I mean, they were. They held the countryside. The United States had the fire bases,
Yeah.
Saigon, but they had the countryside, and they were coming. Besides North Vietnam, they were coming down to South Vietnam, and they were in the country, and you didn't know who was who.
Yeah, that's true.
And they were good at infiltration, and it was their territory. And we were completely out of place there.
It was
Had more
a
fire.
complete, strategic misstep, just thinking that we can go in there and have the advantage when you got these people that this is their backyard. It's unfathomable, I was really annoyed at that one revelation in the documentary. It's about halfway through where they start talking about some of the memos, the top secret memos that were going back and forth in Washington at the Pentagon and in the White House. And very, very few people actually saw it until it was declassified later. There was one of the memorandums was just basically just saying at this point, it's probably almost late 60s maybe. And they're just basically saying that, well, 70% of the reason that we're staying in this basically unwinnable war is to save face, because we can't be seen, America can't be seen as losing, right, as being part of a war that we didn't win. And, only 10% then was left to the original objective. So it became a PR thing at the expense of millions and millions of people. When you take the civilian population, you take the northern and southern Vietnamese fighters and our fighters, and then you watch what happened, and then the unrest at home in our country that was going on at the same time. It was just such a clusterfuck, to use a broad, vulgar term. It was astounding to me that we're staying in it, guys, even though we know we're not going to win it. It's it makes you just shake your head.
A lot of things that you could see it sort of evolve. It was just from the beginning. It was a slow creep to disaster.
Yeah.
I found McNamara's background was interesting. Having the MBA from Harvard, he was, and he's worked for Ford. He was one of the whiz kids, Ford Motor Company, after World War II, briefly. Yeah. And then he gets hired, by the Pentagon and becomes Secretary of Defense, and they turn the war into statistics. And it's not all about statistics, and I think they were trying to run it like a corporation.
Yeah,
that was well instilled at the end of World War II, before it was over, and it just carried over, and they also had the American sense of greatness, and they just thought they couldn't fail, I guess, and save face, and it was ideological. Well, communists, the Cold War.
Exactly.
When, Ho Chi Minh, he just wanted independence for Vietnam. I don't care if it's whatever you want to call me, but he was a shrewd character. They talked about how he tried to dress like a common man, the rubber sandals and sort of the peasant outfit, and
yeah, he did.
Let the beard grow, and to make that iconic figure, and he was, but I think even he became sort of, what's the word, subverted by some of his own deputies.
Well, there was that one point he ended up almost just kind of relinquishing power to his number two guy, and just I think it was DM, something like that.
Yeah, It's Zim or I think
Yeah,
it's
there
Diem.
was. I think it's the Din Diem, and then there was. Yeah, I think it was him, and yeah, so that guy ended up, doing a lot of that, especially towards the period where Ho Chi Minh's health started failing him, and although he would still go sometimes to some of they had those conferences in France to try to negotiate, the terms of maybe ending the war. I think he might have went to some of those earlier meetings, and he had gone to China for meetings and stuff too. He was in a lot of ways he was the public face of the independence movement, and then you have his
Public.
number twos and number threes kind of running the war while he's gone.
Oh my, I got all these thoughts in my head. You had me going there.
Sorry.
Well, no, it's good. Westmoreland, he kept asking for more troops.
More troops. You're right.
Need another 100,000, another 200,000.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the Vietnamese came up with the Tet Offensive, where they would strike everywhere, and they thought.
Yeah, that was incredible.
And they said, that's exactly what they did to the Japanese in August of '45, and they wanted the same thing to happen to the United States. And it happened at Dien Bien Phu, but that was much smaller. It was a French Foreign Legion redoubt, and that I forgot how long that battle lasted. I don't remember. It might have even been a couple of months, but it was crazy. But it didn't all work. The Tet Offensive was a failure in the short run, but in the long run,
yeah.
There's some things that didn't go right for them. There were some trucks that were supposed to take them into Saigon or something. They didn't show up, and some of these bases they attacked, they just got cut down. And
well, it was funny because it was based on our ability to withstand the Tet Offensive, because it was all based almost on chance, because there was that one point where I forget, I think it was it wasn't the main general that was in charge. It was like one of the next ones down basically had said that we got to leave some people. He just had this intuition. Let's leave a squadron of X amount of guys over here by the bases in this part of the country, because you never know what's going to happen, and the main general was kind of like, no, we got to do this, because they were thinking they had gotten, I believe, a tip that something was going to happen around Tet, and the main general was pretty much convinced, it's going to be over here in this part. This is their strategic targets. Yeah.
I'm sorry? You're talking about the American general.
Yes, well, I think it was Westmoreland, yeah.
And then the other general want to keep a few back.
Yeah, and if they didn't, if that one guy didn't really insist, we got to keep some people behind, we totally would have been caught with our pants down. But because we had those forces, which were in many ways defending a lot of the urban areas and the bases and stuff like that, we were able to fight off the offensive.
Yeah.
And what a treat! What a thank goodness, moment that was for us, that we were able to do that. Otherwise, they probably would have taken that whole area. I know that they first started attacking the airports. That was their first, one of their first targets, and unfortunately they did do some damage. But it was seen, though, like you said before, as a failure. And then they had a couple offensives similar to that after that, and they also weren't successful, especially the big last one, which was towards the end of the war, where they had the big standoff at the U.S. Embassy. That was also seen as a failure too.
Well, you mean from the
from the Vietnam perspective, like we were able to defend, the embassy and all that, towards the end, but nevertheless, though, it was still a great strategic move from the North Vietnamese, but it just didn't pay off the way they hoped it would.
There were voices, in the government and in the military that were, thought that the war probably wasn't winnable, and I forgot who, I think, told Johnson that we were supporting the wrong side, meaning the South Vietnamese and their government in the way it was structured. And I mean, he was just an autocrat,
Yeah, I
just
remember
trying
that.
to get where he could get, and he was brutal too. And,
well, yeah, because remember that there was that one point where
They had
in the
what,
middle of the
9?
street, he blew away a couple guys, and he was
Yeah.
he was the guy that we were supporting over there.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, it happened on both sides
Yeah.
for sure.
No, of course.
But I really didn't realize how much overall it was a civil war, but it also had a bigger cause of fighting for independence. You know,
Hmm.
and the North wanted to unite everyone against that idea. And the United States was staying there and saying, you know, well, we don't want a communist country. And that was what was really motivating them. And then it became, well, got to save face too, I think.
Yeah. We should probably bring it to a close. But I appreciate you coming on and talking about Vietnam. And we've only scratched the surface. I mean, we could have spent another hour talking about it. But for anybody that has not watched it, I definitely highly recommend Ken Burns. He's the co-director of it, and that's on Netflix. It's definitely worth your time, especially if you only know a little bit about Vietnam. You'll come out of this learning a lot, and it just shows you how war is always hell. What's that?
It'll stimulate further research.
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah, because I mean, absolutely. I've anytime I watch anything, I always end up looking things up, and especially a movie, I'll go on IMDb and I'll read the trivia, and then I'll look at the actors, and I might recognize somebody in a small role. I'm like, where did I know that guy from? And then I go look it up, and then you get into looking at what they've done, and then you're down a wormhole, or if it's a film based on a true story, I'll go and I'll read what really happened, and then see how the movie compares to the truth story. And so, yeah, I love educating myself. I love learning backstories to things that, are not really widely known. So, yeah, that's why I just really enjoyed this whole documentary series. It just blew me away because, at least for me in my public education, when I was a kid, they didn't touch on Vietnam. I don't remember Vietnam even being brought up much in high school. All I remember is the New Deal, women's suffrage, that kind of stuff. I learned about Vietnam. I took a course in college on it, and that didn't get as in depth as this documentary did. So I really got a lot out of it, and I really just would love people to watch it. I encourage it. And I'm glad that you were game to come on and talk about it. And as I know, you're well versed in all different types of history, so that was really good.
Thanks, Chris.
I'll be in touch. I'll see you soon. I'll let you know when this is done. I'll send you the link on YouTube.
All right. Thanks.
All right, cool, man.
See ya.
Have a good one.